be doing Texas A&M. When Jimbo Fisher got fired last year from Texas A&M, it didn't leave Texas A&M short of talent. They still have a whole lot of great players that he recruited, and they brought in a bunch of transfers that can help them out. They actually had the number four group of transfers in the country this year, and I think that Texas A&M is going to have a really good season this year because I know 7-5 last season with the talent they had was unacceptable, but they did look close in some games to being a really good team last year. They only lost to Alabama by 6 points, and Alabama was the best team in the SEC last season. And then Ole Miss, they only lost to them by 3 points, and Ole Miss, was an 11-win team. Uh, and I think that Mike Elko right now is a better football coach than Jimbo Fisher is, and I think he's a better fit for the program, and I think he's gonna get the most out of their roster. Uh, and Texas A&M's recruiting has still been pretty good since they had that number one recruiting class in 2022. In 2023, they ranked at 15th, and in 2024, they ranked 19th in recruiting. Uh, mm, so, starting with the roster, I will do first, and then I'll do my predictions game by game. On the offensive side at quarterback, they return Connor Wayman, who I think is going to be one of the better quarterbacks of the SEC this season. He was a five-star recruit, one of the top recruits of 2022, and he became their starting quarterback later in the 2022 season, and he struggled then. But then in 2023, he showed improvement, but got hurt early in the season and missed the rest of the season. But he's expected to be healthy for the opener, so they should be in good shape at quarterback. And then at wide receiver, they do lose their best one. Evan Stewart, who transferred out, and he was really good. But they have plenty of good options at the wide receiver position. They've got Jadea Walker, who played in every game last season, but only made 7 starts and had 35 catches for 590. And he had 3 games of 100 plus receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and averaged a really impressive 16.9 yards per catch. And then they have Noah Thomas, who started 8 games and played in 11 games last season and had 29 catches for 359 and a 12.4 yards per catch average. And he had 5 receiving touchdowns, which was the most of any A&M wide receiver last season. I think he'll be good for them. And then they also have Moose Muhammad, who has started only 7 games, but has played in 22 games in college, and has in that combined at 65 catches for 955 and 6 touchdowns, averaging 14.7 a catch. And then they bring in a good wide receiver from Louisiana Tech, Cyrus Allen, who had 46 catches for 778 and 4 touchdowns, averaging 16.9 a catch last season. And then at running back, they're really good here. They've got a great group of running backs. They've got 3 good ones. They've got Amari Daniels, who had a 532 on 105 carries last season and 6 touchdowns, averaging 5.1 a carry. And they have Levon Moss, who had 484 on 96 carries and 5 touchdowns, averaging 5 a carry last season. And they have Ruben Owens, a 5-star running back recruit who had 385 on 101 carries and three touchdowns, averaging 3.8 a carry last season. Uh, mm, and the other two running backs, Daniels and Moss, are four-star running backs. But the problem with A&M is their offensive line, and I think A&M has the ability to have a really good offense this season, but that's going to depend on the offensive line because their offensive line was bad last season. They ranked 94th in pass blocking and 91st in run blocking. And even though A&M had a great running back unit, the offensive line struggles caused them to rank 90th in rushing yards per game last season. Now, they do have three starters coming back on the offensive line, including their best player there, left tackle Trey Zune, who only allowed two sacks and 21 pressures last season. But those other players have got to play much better. Uh, and on the defensive side, Texas A&M had a good defense last season. They only allowed on average 19.8 points per game, and so on the defensive line, they're loaded with talent here. Texas A&M, I think, is going to have one of the best defensive lines in the country this season. So they do lose Walter Nolan, who might be the best defensive lineman in the country, who transferred out, and they also lose LT Overton, another great player who transferred out. But they return Jamar Turner, who had last season in 12 games at 33 tackles and six sacks and two forced fumbles and 34 total pressures. And they bring in one of the best defensive linemen in the country, who surprisingly comes from Purdue. His name is Nick Scorton, who had last season 50 tackles and 10 sacks and 42 total pressures and three pass breakups and a forced fumble. And they have another transfer coming in, Cassius Howell from Bowling Green. He had 27 tackles and nine and a half sacks and 41 total pressures and a forced fumble and pass breakup last season. And they have a four-star Albert Regis, who only has started two games in college, but has played in 23 and has in that 31 tackles and a sack and a pass breakup. He should get more playing time this season. And they have a five-star Shamar Stewart, who has started seven games and played in 25, and has in all of that 34 tackles, three sacks, and two fumble recoveries and two pass breakups. And they have Gabriel Brownlow Dendy, who was the number 8 overall recruit of 2022 and has barely played in college, but he should get a lot more playing time this season. And then at linebacker, they have Tareen York coming back, who is really good. He had 74 tackles and three sacks and eight total pressures and a forced fumble last season. And they bring in two good transfer linebackers. They bring in a transfer from Florida, Scooby Williams, who had 52 tackles and a sack and six total pressures and two forced fumbles last season. And then they bring in a transfer from Pittsburgh, Solomon DeShields, who had 58 tackles and two sacks and 14 total pressures last season. And in the secondary, they're loaded here. So at safety, they've got Bryce Anderson coming back, who had in 11 games 55 tackles and four pass breakups and an interception and at one and a half sacks and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And then they bring in a transfer safety from Central Michigan, Trey Jones, who had in two seasons combined 151 tackles and five pass breakups and three interceptions and a forced fumble. and they have coming back Dalton Brooks, a four-star recruit who only started the bowl game last season, but looked really good in that bowl game, having 7 tackles and an interception. And they bring in a transfer from San Diego State, Marcus Ratcliffe's, who had 51 tackles and an interception and a pass breakup last season. And then at cornerback, they have Tyreek Chappell coming back, who has in 33 games 106 tackles and 24 pass breakups and 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. And they bring in a transfer from UAB, BJ Mays, who has in 2 years combined 82 tackles and 3 interceptions and 21 pass breakups. And then they bring in a transfer from Florida, Jaden Hill, who had last season 39 tackles and 2 sacks and 3 pass breakups and a fumble recovery. And they bring in a transfer from Kansas State, Will Lee, who had 42 tackles and a forced fumble and fumble recovery and 6 pass breakups and 2 interceptions last season. And special teams looks a little bit questionable, but overall, this is a really good roster. So now moving on to the predictions, they open the year against Notre Dame, a game that I think is going to be really close, and both defenses are going to be good, and both offenses are going to be pretty good. But I think this will be a lower scoring game because the defenses will slow down the offenses. Now, I do think there'll be some points in it. I think both teams will score into the 20s. Uh, and I do think that Notre Dame is the better team. But like I said in the Notre Dame video, I have a feeling that Texas A&M playing at home is going to get this win. But I do think this is going to go down to the end. But then they play McNeese, which will be a huge blowout win. And then they play on the road at Florida. So Florida is a much worse team than Texas A&M, and I think Mike Elko is a much better coach than the coach Florida has. I think he's one of the worst coaches in the country, almost as bad as Coach Prime. But Florida is going to have a decent quarterback, but Texas A&M has a lot more playmakers at the wide receiver and running back positions, and Florida's offensive line is not very good either, and Florida's front seven is not very good at all. Now, Florida may have a pretty good secondary, but I'm not going to try to pretend like Florida is a good team. They're not good, and I just tell it how it is on this channel. And I think Texas A&M wins this one. So then they're playing Bowling Green. It'll be a blowout win. So then after that, they play Arkansas, a rivalry game. So this one it could be somewhat competitive, but Texas A&M has so many more good players at every position and a much better quarterback than Arkansas does, except for maybe the offensive line. But I think Texas A&M will win this one by 2 scores, at least 10 points. So then they play Missouri at home. So Missouri's offense, I think, will score quite a few points in this game. Their offense is going to be really good, one of the best in the SEC. But I don't really like Missouri's defense, and I think Texas A&M will score a whole lot of points in this game. Don't think Missouri will be able to slow them down much. And I like Texas A&M's defense better to be able to get enough stops to win a close game. So then they play on the road at Mississippi State. This should be a blowout win. Mississippi State is worse than everyone in the SEC, I think, this year except for Vanderbilt. So then LSU at home. So LSU and Texas A&M's quarterbacks are probably pretty similar. LSU's quarterback Nussmeyer, I think, is going to be pretty good for them. Now LSU has a huge advantage. on the offensive line in this game. But Texas A&M has a much better group of running backs than LSU does, and LSU's defensive line I think is going to be really bad again, and Texas A&M is going to be great there, and I think LSU is going to struggle in the secondary again, especially at the cornerback position, and A&M is loaded there. LSU does have good linebackers, and if this was at LSU, I would pick them, but I think A&M wins a close one at home. Then they play on the road at South Carolina. So I know about South Carolina being a pretty tough place to play, but this would be crazy for Texas A&M to lose this game, even on the road. I think they'll win this game by around 2 touchdowns. South Carolina is just not going to be any good this year. Uh, and then New Mexico State, this should be a real easy win. Uh, and then on the road at Auburn. So, this is the week before the Iron Bowl, and actually, Auburn, last season, the week before the Iron Bowl, got blown out by New Mexico State. But I think that Hugh Freeze and the team would have learned from that, and they'll not just be looking ahead to Alabama, but be prepared for this game against Texas A&M, and you know how hard it is to play at Auburn. And Auburn's offense, I do think, will struggle to score on Texas A&M's defense, but I think they will be able to get in the 20s in this game because their offense, I don't think, is going to be quite as one-dimensional as it was last year because they do have much better wide receivers than last year. And Auburn's defense, I think, is also going to be pretty good. And I think they'll play really well defensively at home. Now, I do think Texas A&M is a clearly better team than Auburn, but I think Auburn gets this win. So then they end the season in the rivalry coming back against Texas at home. I think it's going to be a great game. I think there'll be a decent amount of points scored, but Texas A&M, I think, is probably going to struggle to run the football in this game because Texas is still going to have a great defensive line, and I think they'll dominate A&M's offensive line. Now, Texas's secondary is not that good, so I think Connor Wayman and those wide receivers that they have will have quite a bit of success in this game. But I like Quinn Ewers better than Connor Wayman as a quarterback. And I think he'll make some big plays throwing in this game, even on Texas A&M's great secondary. And Texas's offensive line, is one of the best in the country. They have a huge advantage there. So I think A&M has a chance to win this one. I think it'll be really close, but I think Texas wins this one. Maybe just on a last second field goal. But my final prediction for Texas A&M is uh, 10-2 overall and 6-2 in the conference. And if this prediction comes true, they'll go to the college football playoff. And you can tell me I'm stupid in the comments, and that I would just hype up Texas A&M any year. But I've never been high on Texas A&M like this until this season. I just think they're a team that needed the right coach to have a really good season, and I think this coach is going to be the right coach for them to have success. But that will be it with this video, and please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back very soon.